another episode of Varsity360. Once again, I'm Micah with the Columbian, joined today by Meg Wochnick. And some good stuff must be going on if Meg's with us today, because it's been such a active offseason for high school football. Certainly one of the more active off seasons that I can remember in the 10 or so years that I've been back with the Columbian sports department. So we have about 3 different topics we're going to get to today, but as usual, we're coming to you from the First Pacific Financial Studio. Thank you to them for supporting the show, for supporting high school sports, and by extension, supporting the community at large. But the 3A Greater St. Helens League is going to look a lot different when the football season arrives this fall, and that is because of the addition of Shelton. Shelton, for those of you who might not be familiar with it, is a town kind of northwest of Olympia, kind of up there on the Olympic Peninsula. And Meg, how did Shelton get into the 3A Greater St. Helens League, a league that has been in recent years basically teams from down here in Clark County and up to Kelso?
Yeah, so this right now is a 2-year agreement for football only. I want to preface that because a lot of folks were thinking that it was all sports across the board, and it's not. So it's only for football for at least the next 2 years and possibly for the next 4 years through the 2027 season. And that's talking with Stephen Baranowski, the Camas Athletic Director, as well as the president of the Greater St. Helens 4A and 3A. So how did we get here? So back in January, right before all of the reclassification was finalized by the executive board of the WIAA, Shelton learned that its appeal to remain in 2A, where it's been the last 4 years, was denied. They lost their appeal. And so basically Shelton, being reclassified as a 3A school, was essentially in no man's land. They were a school without a home, essentially. And so the Evergreen Conference, which has been the league that Shelton's played in for the last 4 years as a 2A school, extended an invitation for Shelton to remain in the league as a 3A member in a 2A league, as long as Shelton goes its own separate path for the postseason. This is where the Greater St. Helens League comes into play. Because Shelton is still in District 4, and again, they're about 2 hours north of here, northwest of Olympia, about 25 miles north, near the Hood Canal. Schools have to still have a postseason path. Every school in all 9 districts across the state are guaranteed a postseason path by their district. And so when school leaders got together in February, they were trying to figure out how best to accommodate Shelton as, again, a 3A school where the only 3A league in District 4 is right here in Clark County with the 3A Greater St. Helens League. So the easiest and most logical thing to do is to just put Shelton into the 3A Greater St. Helens League. So for the next 2 years, it'll be a 6-team league in football, joining Heritage, Mountain View, Prairie, Kelso, and Mountain View. So it's a nice round number, 6. That means there's 5 league games, 4 non-league contests. League games will start October 4th. Shelton will host Heritage and Prairie, and they will travel 3 times down south to face Evergreen, Mountain View, and Kelso. So that's where we are as far as football goes. What I still am uncertain about right now, and I've gotten a lot of questions about this, is does that mean the league is going to get an extra postseason berth? And the answer is we don't know yet. That's something that allocations for next year haven't been finalized. We'll find out in May. If you remember, the last 2 years, the GSHL in football has only gotten 2 berths. So you got to think with an extra team coming in and making it 6, you got to think that odds are good that you're going to get a 3rd playoff spot, but you just never know. So that's where we are with football and the addition of the Shelton High Climbers.
Yeah. Someone might ask, and of course you know much more than I do about how these districts work and how the WIA kind of structures everything, but would it be an unreasonable question to say, well, why does Shelton, they're the only team in District 4 that's 3A up in that area, would they consider looking at the Tacoma area, District 3, and say, why not just hop over there and be part of these leagues that are a little bit geographically closer?
Right, exactly. Great question. So I actually reached out to Shelton before my story published a couple weeks ago, asking a number of questions, and that was one of those questions. If you remember, Shelton has been a longtime member of District 3. In fact, back in the day, I mean, we're talking the last 10 to 15 years, they've been a part of the 3A Narrows League before they disbanded. More recently, as far as 2016, they were part of that 3A South Sound Conference. So yes, there's a lot of familiarity with Shelton and being a member of District 3. Unfortunately, my requests for my questions were not answered, and so I just don't know if that was an option. But the fact that the Evergreen 2A conference reached out and allowed Shelton to remain in the league means that Shelton would remain a District 4 school. And so that's how we got in the situation we're in now as far as getting the 3A Greater St. Helens League involved for football only. But yeah, that's a fair point. As far as geographically, I mentioned kind of no man's land earlier. Where you look at Shelton on a map, they're kind of also in no man's land. It's difficult to get to, especially if you're coming from the Tacoma area. You got to go south on I-5. You got to cut over west to 101 and north about 25 miles. It's very difficult. But travel-wise, it would be a lot easier for them to be a part of District 3 than it would be essentially to travel down multiple times to play a football game.
You mentioned the teams that have to hit the road and go up north now for an extra trip out of the area. What kind of impact do you think this is going to have over the course of this agreement on teams kind of budgeting their travel and preparing for that travel? I mean, that's it's no small feat to get 50 to 80 kids onto a couple of buses and move them 100 plus miles.
Right. No, I don't think it's going to be an impact at all, right? You got to look at it just like maybe a typical non-league contest or maybe a postseason Week 10 game, right, where you're kind of looking at it as a business trip. Again, it's 2 hours by car. You got to factor it's a little bit longer, obviously, on a school bus. But again, there's only two teams. That's Prairie and Heritage that are going to be making the trip north for this fall, and then they'll reverse it for 2025. But no, I don't see this really being an impact whatsoever.
Well, the addition of Shelton doesn't only impact the 3A Greater St. Helens League. Meg, you were talking recently about actually some breaking news that we might be able to have here in how that will impact the 4A Greater St. Helens League and possibly do away with the mandate that you have these 3A, 4A crossover games. What can you tell us?
Exactly. So if you remember the last, I don't know how many years now, right around week 5, week 6, we've had 4A versus 3A crossover games, right? We've seen, for example, the last couple of years, we've seen Heritage versus Skyview. We've seen Camas versus Evergreen. It's been kind of a hot topic, especially among the 3A coaches, just about playing a 4A opponent, especially in the middle of their 3A schedule, concerned about injuries and so forth. So because of the addition of Shelton, that means there's no more need for that 4A, 3A crossover, right? Because that benefited the 4As because they're such a small league, being just 4 schools. So because of that, Stephen Baranowski, the 4A, 3A Greater St. Helens League president, has actually created a 2-year agreement with the Oregon 6A Three Rivers League. And if you're familiar with Oregon football, you know that the Three Rivers League is probably the best 6A league in the state. We're talking about Westland, Tualatin, which played for the 6A championship last year, Lake Oswego, Lake Ridge, Oregon City. Up until a couple years ago, Clackamas was in that league as well. So fantastic football. So for the next 2 years, 3 of our 4A schools, Camas, Union, Skyview, will take on Oregon City, Westland, and Tualatin. So for 2024, it's going to be Camas at Oregon City, Union at Tualatin, and then I think what's going to be the big one is a Clark County homecoming for former Camas head coach John Eagle when he brings his Westland Lions to Kiggins Bowl to take on Steve Kaiser and the Skyview Storm. All of those games are Week 4 games. So it's going to be a fantastic crossover between the 4A Greater St. Helens League and the Three Rivers League out of the Oregon 6As.
That's going to be such compelling football action. It reminds me a little bit of what they did at the college level a couple of decades back with marrying the conferences. I know in college basketball you do like the ACC Big Ten Challenge or something like that. This is kind of the high school football equivalent of that. My first thoughts when I hear that is, so many of those 4A, 3A crossover games ended up being pretty lopsided, and you wondered what benefit it was, not only for the 4A team that was usually in the dominant position there to, maybe you get some JV kids some more playing time, but also for the 3A team that was pretty much overmatched. It didn't make a lot of sense. So for me, that bringing a quality Oregon opponent either over here or going over there, just I think is going to be a net benefit for everybody. Second impression is how fun is it for Steve Pine to continue to go back to Oregon and pester some of those, opponents that he did for so many years at Central Catholic.
Right. And is it a coincidence that Union's facing Tualatin? If you remember, Steve Pine's final game as Central Catholic's head coach, winning his 5th championship in 10 years at Central Catholic, was against Tualatin. And the schedule makers made Tualatin and Union face off. That's not a coincidence. I think that was done on purpose.
I think the script writers earned their money.
Exactly. So it's, and again, Central Catholic faced West Linn. That was a 12-7 game in the state semifinals. That game was played at Oregon City's field. So yeah, Three Rivers football is absolutely fantastic. You look at the last 6, 8, 9 years, West Linn has started to become a powerhouse. Tualatin, now kind of an upstart program, 2 years ago won the 6A title in boys basketball. And so you talk about kind of the level of athletes all around, and now we're starting to see it in football. So this is a tremendous thing. Obviously, John Eagle and leading his West Linn Lions over to Kiggins Bowl, that's going to be a fantastic non-league game in week 4 for a Skyview team that's coming off a state quarterfinal berth. So this is a great thing. And I want to preface it, too, by saying that there are a couple of crossover games that some teams chose to remain on the schedule. For example, the in-district rival games between Prairie and Battleground, that's still going to happen. Mountain View Union, that's still going to happen. In fact, Evergreen and Union will play in week 1. I believe there's one more. I think it's Mountain View and Battleground. So those schools chose to schedule those teams on their own. But as far as kind of that mandated thing we saw week 5, week 6 for the last, 3, 4, 5 years now, that is gone. So at least for the next 2 years, we're going to see Three Rivers football against some quality 4A Greater St. Helens teams.
And we can't wait.
Exactly.
Change is also happening with one of the football programs closer at Mark Morris that hasn't had a lot of change at the top recently because Sean Perkins was the coach there for 21 years until he decided to retire after this year, which opened the door for a homecoming of sorts, a familiar name for anyone who's paid attention to high school football around here, especially Prairie high school football. And that's Mike Peck coming back to his home in Longview, a place where he has family connections. This is the right fit, you think, isn't it?
No question. Mike and I, we've exchanged a couple of texts since his hiring was official made a couple weeks ago. Yeah, you said it. He's a Longview guy. He's a graduate, class of 2008 with R.A. Long. His grandfather, Hall of Famer with Longview. His father, Mark Morris alum, and in fact Larry Peck is going to be a part of Mike Peck's coaching staff now, coming home to Longview. So this, no-brainer hire. When I heard a number of the folks who had applied, I'm thinking if Mike Peck's on that list, this is Mike Peck's job. And sure enough, about a week later, the hiring was made official. It's great to see him back in Southwest Washington. He spent the last 2 years as an offensive coordinator at a 5A school in Idaho. And it's great to know that he's going to be back in a familiar place. When I think of Mike Peck, number one is such an innovative guy. If you follow him on Twitter, he's always talking ball, and it's always just kind of fun to see what things he's talking about, and there's diagrams of plays and so on and so forth. But the thing about Mike that I appreciate is he knows how to win and knows how to turn around a program in a hurry, right? He spent 4 years at Prairie, and by his second year, this was the 2019 season, taking a Prairie program that really didn't have a strong, rich tradition in football, leads them to the 3A Greater St. Helens League title, first one in 27 years, leads them to the first round of the state playoffs, first time in 3 decades. And I was at that first round state playoff game. They were basically 2 plays away from beating Marysville-Pilchuck and going to the state quarterfinals before ultimately losing in overtime. So he's going to turn that program around in a hurry. Sean Perkins, you said it, 21 years at Mark Morris, traditionally a wing T guy. Mike Peck is a very not wing T guy. So he is an empty backfield, 4 wide out set, no huddle offense guy. So I think that 2019 Prairie team led the state in multiple statistical categories, including points per game in total offense. So get ready to see a completely new look Mark Morris team. It's going to be fun to watch and very difficult to prepare for if you're an opposing team.
I think that's a great point. And we in our prep work, we kind of talked about what a drastic change this is going to be. It's going to be a completely unrecognizable Mark Morris team if you've gotten used to following them over the past 2 decades. But how much of a challenge is that for a new coach to come in and put in place an entirely different scheme and offense and philosophy when maybe kids who have come up through the freshman and the JV ranks are used to running the prior system?
Exactly. That's going to be the first thing for Mike, right? And knowing him, I know he's a fan of this podcast. I know he watches this religiously, but I would suspect that his goals, he's right up there. He suspects them of going to be pushing for a playoff berth in year 1, and I wouldn't put it past him. Again, you think of what I mentioned a few minutes ago, what he did at Prairie. By year 2, look at the turnaround that happened. So I suspect they will hit the ground running very quickly in what's going to be a very competitive 2A Greater St. Helens League. But you're right, they're going to be installing a completely new offense that's going to be exciting, that's going to get kids excited to play football at Mark Morris, and going to get maybe some of those athletes that play other sports, such as basketball and baseball and even wrestling, maybe to come out for football, maybe that they wouldn't otherwise do it. In the wing T, it's an effective offense, but it's not very exciting. With Mike's offense, you're throwing the ball 25, 30 times a game. You're putting up 60, 65. How many 70-point games have I seen Prairie in that 2019 season? I remember covering that playoff game against Capital, where I had to actually take out a second stat sheet. There was so much going on. So it's going to be an exciting time for Mark Morris. But again, it's got a lot to learn and a very fast turnaround for the first season.
Well, you mentioned the fact that one constant with Mark Morris is that they always have athletes. You see that across, some of their baseball success, definitely with their basketball success. And then recently they've had skill position players in football, especially in the backfield, that were really impressive. The interesting thing that I hope we can talk about before moving on is what this means for the 2A Greater St. Helens League here in the near term, a league that I think if you look at it is pretty wide open.
I think it is too. I think we talked about Woodland and their historic run last year, first league title in 15 years, getting the first round of the state playoffs in a decade. I think right now you got to look at Woodland as the favorite with someone like Elijah Anderson, who is a playmaker no matter where he is, special teams, offense, defense. That kid is something special. And I think you look at the senior class, there's a number of other guys that will be around him that will make it special. I think you look at Ridgefield, they've got a number of guys coming back from a team that even though they finished 4th coming out of that tiebreaker, they were really, that week 9 game, that was for the league championship facing against Woodland. And so you got to think with Washougal, with the graduation of Holden B., arguably the best player to ever come out of Washougal football program, you got to wonder, I'm not sure, number one, who's going to be quarterback. I guess that's something I can ask Dave Hajek this offseason. But you got to wonder, does Washougal take a step back after kind of being the league favorite for the last number of years? So, but as far as kind of those 4 postseason spots, Mark Morris is going to be in the mix, and they should. Mike Peck should expect for his kids to be in the mix even out of the gate in year 1.
Well, I think not only Woodland is a perfect example of how a program, once it kind of finds its identity, can really take that league by its horns. You've seen that happen with Sean McDonald in only his 2nd year there, elevating that program to a league championship status, the emergence of Elijah Anderson. But another program I look at as indicative of the possibilities in this league is someone like Hudson's Bay, a team that I don't think before last year any of us thought would be in the conversation for being a league title contender. And then look, 5 weeks into the season, they hadn't lost yet and were playing in a way that made you think the Eagles would, be around and making some noise in week 9, and they were making it all the way to the postseason.
No, it was. So that was one of my surprise teams looking at them, right? I mean, it was the first time I saw them play, it's 2 5-0 teams going at it between them and Washougal. So again, Mark Oliverio just does a tremendous job with the athletes that he gets out at Hudson's Bay. And I suspect they're going to be right in the mix again. This was the team, again, was part of that tiebreaker last year out at Battleground. Ended up getting in that third spot, but I suspect them also will be right in the mix. It's going to be a lot of parity in the 2A Greater St. Helens League. That was really kind of the storyline for last year, and I suspect that will be really the same thing this go around.
Yeah, I don't know how the 2A Greater St. Helens League can upstage itself this upcoming season after what it did this last year, but it's going to be an incredibly fun league to watch, and the addition of Mike Peck at Mark Morris is definitely going to allow a good entertainment value to happen. The last topic we want to address here today is going back to the 3A Greater St. Helens League and what's going on at Mountain View. Mountain View is going to be looking for its third coach in 3 years. This is a program that is not used to high turnover. Adam Matheson, of course, built that program into a state powerhouse, was there for a long time. Now Adam Matheson, after being away and advising Camas for 1 year, has now taken the reins at Camas for what I think should be a great fit there. But where does that leave Mountain View after Coach Aaron Hart steps away after just 1 year? What do you think needs to happen between now and the start of the football season for Mountain View to get its ducks in a row and be ready to go in the fall?
Well, it depends on the hire process, right? I mean, you talked about Mountain View now is about to hire its third head coach in 3 years. And when I started getting text messages, DMs, a number of folks letting me know, this was back on March 1st when Aaron Hart stepped down. Within about 20 minutes is when I started getting word. And we were up at the Hardwood Classic in Tacoma covering state basketball. And my first reaction was, Mountain View? Like a program, and not just a football program, but a school and athletic department that has a tradition of stability and longevity with coaches. Aaron Cateau, baseball, just had his 200th win at Mountain View, been there since 2008. I think of Nick Frost with the tennis program. I think of J.C. Alexander, who's led the boys basketball program for as long as I've been here in Vancouver. And it's just like, Mountain View is one of those programs you don't think of when it comes to high turnover. And here we are about to have the third head coach in football in 3 years. And what's different about this time around is the cupboard is bare when it comes to assistant coaches. When Adam Matheson stepped down in late April last year, this was after the budget cuts had eliminated all of the athletic director positions across all 4 of the comprehensive high schools in Evergreen Public Schools. But the majority of his assistant coaches stayed on board for a position that Aaron Hart ultimately took over as head coach in early June. That's not the case now. So I would say the majority of the coaches from last fall's team that went 9-2, won the 3A Greater St. Helens League, reached the first round of the state playoffs, for a variety of reasons, weren't going to come back in 2024. Whether that was going off and joining other local programs around the area, whether that was they weren't planning to coach this fall, or whether that was kind of a predetermined thing of, hey, we'll kind of give you a 1 year, we'll be on staff for 1 year as part of that transition. And that was a couple of coaches kind of gave Aaron Hart that agreement. We'll be on staff for 1 year as part of your transition from Matheson to you, but that's it. From a number of folks I've talked to, there's 1, maybe 2 guys that are left over. And so that is an alarming thing to hear, that basically not only is there no head coach, but there's not even a staff in place right now. And here we are, we're a couple of days away from flipping the calendar to April. And this is a very, very unusual situation for any program to be in, much less a program like Mountain View with so much stability and longevity before the last 12 months.
On the surface, you would look at it and say, this is a great job. A 3A school, a well-established league in a growing community, a new building, new weight room, new fitness facilities, new turf fields, new locker rooms. You would say like, oh, this is a no-brainer. But obviously, for a number of reasons, there are unique challenges for whoever takes this job, not the least of which having to fill the entire coaching staff and dealing with a program that's had so much turnover in just the last 12 months. For what type of person does this job make sense?
Well, I think I want to go back to what you just said about Mountain View. It's still an attractive position, right? It's a program that has name recognition, not just in Clark County, but you look across 3A football and it has that success. Again, a lot of it is because of what Adam Matheson built in 15 years. And you said it. This is year 2 of Mountain View's beautiful brand new school. That weight room, 15 squat racks in that weight room? Do you know how many small colleges would love to have the weight room that Mountain View has? So that's very attractive. You look at the turf fields, the multi-purpose turf fields that they can use to their advantage. Again, that's something that's very unique to all of the comprehensive schools in the district. So again, there's a lot of pluses. But you look on the flip side, and this is a district that's going to have its 3rd straight year of budget cuts, and they're looking at about $18 million. And granted, a lot of that is coming with school administration jobs as well as central office staff positions. But you got to wonder, is there going to be a teaching position open right now? And so whoever takes this over, the first thing that comes to my mind is, are they going to bring their own staff with them? Kind of like what Steve Pine did coming over from Central Catholic to Union. Talking with him last month when he was hired, he was planning to bring over, at the time, around 4 to 5 guys, possibly even more with him. So you just, again, got to wonder at this point in the off season. A lot of coaching staffs are finalized. Spring football starts in 7 weeks. So whoever takes this job, it's a bit of an uphill battle.
So do you think it makes more sense for kind of someone, maybe a younger person trying to break in, who's willing to, take whatever parts they can assemble, or does it make more sense for maybe someone who has some recognition, who maybe can draw on a few contacts?
Well, it all depends, frankly, on who applies, right? Yeah. I mean, if they get 2 applicants, what's going to happen if no one's qualified, right? I mean, that's who knows? And so I've heard a couple of names who applied. Out of respect for them, I'm not going to say who they are here, but there are some recognizable names, not only as head coaches, but also assistant coaches. So if I was Cale Pyland, I know he's kind of leading the charge in this hire. I think you got to go with someone who has a background as a head coach. So that would probably be the route that I would take, but I'm also not making the hire.
Yeah, it's not related to Mountain View, but I think it's a question that listeners of the show might want to know. And I know you and I talked about it, but Evergreen Public Schools isn't the only district in the area that's facing budget cuts. It's well reported that Vancouver Public Schools is also facing a financial shortfall and having to reduce staff. But it's your understanding that this is not going to impact athletics, right?
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. So VPS has projected a $35 million shortfall for next school year. Through our reporting and talking with a number of folks, if you look at some of the surveys that were done, in fact, extracurricular activities, including athletics, a lot of the folks, the stakeholders in the community, that was kind of the least priority when it came to the cuts. And so a lot of these cuts are being done, again, similar to Evergreen, done at the district level. Superintendent Jeff Snell is taking a 15% pay cut. There are a number of teachers who are going to be losing their positions. But again, there might be some interested applicants who would be interested in applying for the Mountain View job. But again, it all kind of comes down to if there's going to even be a teaching position open at Mountain View. Aaron Hart was not a teacher. And so right there, you got to wonder if there's even a position open for whoever takes this job.
Yeah, I mean, it's a landscape that is shifting. Nothing is constant, as we said before, but it's going to be a really interesting thing to see what happens with Mountain View, a program that basically has been the preeminent fixture atop the 3A Greater St. Helens League, dealing with that level of uncertainty, but still having year in, year out, the athletes that make it a league championship contender. We'll be eager to see what happens on that front. We'll be eager to see what Mike Peck does in a short period of time at Mark Morris. I'm sure he won't waste any time making that program a really exciting and competitive team to watch. And of course, the Three Greater St. Helens League welcoming Shelton in. It's going to be a new dynamic, a new team, a new foe to scout, and hopefully an additional playoff berth. So we shall see. We shall keep you up to date. As always, tune in. Of course, be sure to see us. Look up our YouTube channel. It's at 360 Preps 1 to see not only this show, but all the other content we're putting out as we head into the spring season. Once again, Columbian sports editor Micah Rice, Meg Wochnick coming to you from the First Pacific Financial Studio, and we shall see you next week.